Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we're diving deep into an issue that's super relevant for all you UPSC aspirants out there.
Definitely a hot topic. And we're taking our cues from a recent article in the Indian Express, all about rising sea levels.
A pretty crucial issue for India, wouldn't you say? Especially with that massive coastline.
Absolutely. It's something that pops up in both prelims and mains, and for good reason. India is particularly vulnerable to those rising seas.
And the article doesn't waste any time hitting us with a pretty hard-hitting fact.
Yeah, those melting glaciers, right?
Exactly. They've already caused sea levels to rise, what was it, almost 2 centimeters this century?
Almost 2 centimeters, yep. And get this, they're still losing something like 273 billion tons of ice every single year.
Crazy, right?
273 billion tons. That's hard to even fathom. But honestly, 2 centimeters, it doesn't sound like that much.
I get what you mean. But here's the thing. For every centimeter of sea level rise, you're talking about 2 million more people facing the threat of annual flooding. Wow, 2 million people per centimeter. That's a whole different way of looking at it.
Right. Makes you think. And this isn't just speculation, by the way. This research comes from scientists at the University of Edinburgh and the University of Zurich, published in Nature.
Serious stuff. Okay, so let's break it down a little. Why is this happening? What's causing the sea level to rise in the first place?
Well, think of it as two main culprits. You've got your melting glaciers and ice sheets.
Okay, glaciers I get, but ice sheets.
Ice sheets are basically massive glaciers, like supersized ones. We're talking covering over 50,000 square kilometers. Think Greenland, Antarctica, that sort of scale.
So it's like the difference between a regular ice cube and one of those giant blocks they use for ice sculptures.
Exactly. And while both contribute to the rising sea levels, it's actually the smaller glaciers that are melting faster than those huge ice sheets.
So it's not just about the big guys. It's the combined effect of all that melting ice.
Exactly. And then there's the second culprit, thermal expansion.
Thermal expansion.
Yeah, it's kind of like imagine heating a pot of water on the stove. As the water gets hotter, it expands, takes up more space.
Oh, right, like how a balloon gets bigger when you blow air into it.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Same principle.
Right.
And that's what's happening with our oceans. Warmer temperatures mean the seawater expands, and that adds to the rising sea levels.
Ooh, so we've got melting ice pouring in, plus the water itself is expanding because it's getting warmer. A real 1-2 punch.
Yeah, a double whammy for sure.
So how fast are we talking here? How quickly are these sea levels actually rising?
Well, since 1880, when we started keeping track, sea levels have risen globally by about 21 centimeters.
Okay, 21 centimeters over, what, more than a century?
Yeah, but here's the catch. The rate of increase has more than doubled since 1993. Went from 0.18 centimeters to 0.42 centimeters per year.
Wow, so it's speeding up.
Big time. Between 1993 and 2024, that's a 10-centimeter rise. Fastest rate in over 2,500 years.
That's a pretty alarming acceleration. But I'm guessing this isn't happening uniformly across the globe, right? Some areas must be worse than others.
Absolutely, and this is where things get really interesting, especially for UPSC. Gotta understand those regional variations. For instance, the southwestern Indian Ocean, rising faster than the global average.
How much faster?
It's seeing about 2.5 millimeters per year.
And why is that?
Local factors, things like variations in ocean heat content and salinity.
Salinity, that's the saltiness of the water, right?
Bingo. So some areas are definitely getting hit harder than others.
And speaking of getting hit hard, let's talk about India. We know this is a major concern, especially for our coastal cities. What's the research saying about the impact on India?
Well, the Center for Study of Science, Technology, and Policy in Bengaluru, they've been doing some really interesting work on this. They've been tracking sea level changes in Indian coastal cities.
And what are they finding? What's the situation looking like?
Well, unfortunately, Mumbai is at the top of the list. Between 1987 and 2021, Mumbai experienced a sea level rise of 4.44 centimeters.
4.4 centimeters, is that a lot?
Well, remember, Mumbai's average elevation is only about 10 meters above sea level.
Oh, right, so even a small increase can have a big impact there.
Exactly. And Mumbai isn't alone. CSF's research also highlights other vulnerable cities, places like Haldia, Visakhapatnam, Kochi. They're all seeing those sea levels creep up.
So we're starting to get a clearer picture of the problem. Sea levels are rising, and some areas, including parts of India, are being hit particularly hard. But what does this actually mean for people and the environment? That's what we'll explore in part 2 of this deep dive. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to stay updated.
It's one thing to talk about these global trends, and, for you UPSC folks, it's all about understanding how this plays out in India specifically.
Right. So what for India, that's key for those exams.
Exactly. And we're talking about a country with, what is it, over 7,500 kilometers of coastline?
That's a lot of
A
coastline.
lot of coastline, and a huge chunk of the population living in those coastal zones.
Right. So let's get down to it then. What does a future with rising sea levels actually look like for India? Paint me a picture.
Well, think increased coastal erosion. Imagine more frequent and intense flooding, people displaced from their homes. This isn't some, far off threat. It's happening now.
It's almost like a slow motion disaster unfolding.
Exactly.
And the article also mentions cyclones becoming even more destructive. How does that tie into rising sea levels?
So think about it. A higher baseline sea level means when a cyclone hits, that storm surge is starting from a higher point. It can penetrate further inland, causing even more damage.
Oh, I see.
Like, remember Cyclone Amphen back in 2020?
Yeah.
Devastating, right. And with rising sea levels, future cyclones could be even worse.
So we're talking about a potential humanitarian crisis here.
Absolutely.
But it goes beyond just the immediate devastation, right?
Mm-hmm.
What about the long-term economic consequences for India?
Huge implications there, too. India's coastal economy is a major driver. Fishing, tourism, those ports, all vital. But rising sea levels put all of that at risk. We're talking potential job losses, damage to critical infrastructure, disruption to trade, transportation. The economic fallout could be massive.
This is exactly the kind of in-depth analysis that UPSC examiners are looking for. So what can India do about it? What strategies can we use to deal with this rising tide?
Well, that's the key question, isn't it?
It is. I know from my own UPSC prep that having a strong understanding of policy is crucial.
You're absolutely right, and proactive policymaking is essential here. First off, India needs robust coastal zone management plans. We're talking about things like regulating development in vulnerable areas, promoting sustainable land use practices, investing in things like seawalls, mangrove restoration to physically protect those coastlines.
So it's about building resilience into those coastal communities, making them better able to withstand the impacts.
Exactly. And another crucial element, early warning systems.
Oh, right. So people have time to prepare and, if necessary, evacuate.
Exactly. If we can accurately predict those extreme weather events and get that information out to people in a timely manner, it can save lives.
Right. So it's about investing in things like sophisticated weather modeling,
Yeah.
reliable communication systems.
Exactly. And don't forget about well-rehearsed evacuation plans.
So a combination of physical infrastructure and getting the right information to the right people at the right time.
That's the key.
But adapting to the problem is only part of the solution, right?
Yeah.
We also need to address the root cause climate change.
That's a crucial point, especially for the UPSC folks. We've got to keep that global context in mind.
So what role does India play in that global effort?
Well, India has committed to some pretty ambitious targets when it comes to renewable energy, cutting those greenhouse gas emissions.
Right.
Meeting those targets isn't just about being a good global citizen. It's about protecting India's own future.
Right. It's in their own self-interest.
Exactly. Think investing in solar and wind energy, promoting energy efficiency, moving away from those fossil fuels.
So it's about recognizing that what happens in one part of the world impacts everyone else.
Absolutely.
But it's not all on the government, right? What about us? What can individuals and communities do to be part of the solution?
Awareness is key. People need to understand how their actions, even seemingly small things, contribute to climate change.
Right. So understanding that individual impact.
Think about things like reducing your energy consumption at home, adopting a more sustainable lifestyle,
Being mindful of those everyday choices.
and supporting policies that put environmental protection front and center.
So it's a collective effort, a shared responsibility.
Absolutely. We're all in this together.
But we can't forget that for many people in those coastal communities, this isn't some abstract future threat. It's their reality right now.
That's a harsh truth. And for those UPSC folks preparing, understanding these on-the-ground realities is essential.
So what are those immediate challenges?
Loss of land, loss of homes, leading to displacement, migration, livelihoods being disrupted, particularly for those dependent on fishing, agriculture. And then there's the psychological impact, that constant uncertainty, the threat of future disasters hanging over their heads.
Right. So it's not just the physical impacts, but the emotional toll as well.
Exactly.
So what kind of support do they need?
We're talking about the need for social safety nets, economic support, programs to help people adapt to this new reality.
So policies that address displacement, provide alternative livelihood options.
Exactly, and investing in mental health services, community resilience programs.
Look, because this is going to be a long-term challenge.
It is. And for you, aspiring policymakers, thinking critically about how these interventions can be implemented effectively, that's essential.
Right. It's about turning policy into action, making a tangible difference in people's lives. And as UPSC aspirants, understanding these on-the-ground challenges is vital for crafting those effective solutions. But it's not just about people, is it? What about the impact on India's biodiversity, particularly those fragile coastal ecosystems?
That's another critical piece of the puzzle. India's coastal biodiversity is incredibly rich and diverse, but it's facing a double whammy: rising sea levels and those broader impacts of climate change.
So what are some of the specific threats we're looking at? Let's unpack that a bit.
Well, think about those iconic mangrove forests along India's coastlines. They're vital for protecting against erosion. They're a habitat for countless species.
Right, those mangroves are real superheroes of the ecosystem.
Exactly. And they even help fight climate change by absorbing that carbon dioxide. But rising sea levels can inundate these forests, pushing them inland.
Where they might not be able to survive.
Exactly. It's a domino effect, right? Not only are the mangroves themselves threatened, but all those vital services they provide are at risk too.
And what about those coral reefs? I know they're super sensitive to changes in water temperature, acidity.
Oh, absolutely. Coral reefs, they're like the canaries in the coal mine when it comes to climate change. Rising sea levels, coupled with that ocean warming, the acidification, it can lead to coral bleaching.
Coral bleaching?
Yeah, where the corals lose their color, become more susceptible to disease, and that can lead to widespread coral death.
Decimating those ecosystems.
Exactly. It's a reminder of how interconnected everything is. Changes in one area can have ripple effects throughout the whole system. And for you, UPSC aspirants, understanding these complex interactions, that's key for formulating those holistic environmental policies.
Right, it's all connected. But protecting nature isn't just for nature's sake, right? These ecosystems, they provide essential services to humans too.
Oh, absolutely. Think about the fishing industry. Those coral reefs, those mangrove forests, they act as nurseries for so many commercially important fish species. They also help protect those coastal communities, acting as a buffer against storm surges, erosion.
So losing these ecosystems would have major consequences for the environment and the economy.
It's a huge issue.
It's a reminder that environmental protection isn't just about preserving some pristine wilderness. It's about safeguarding the natural systems that underpin our well-being, our economic prosperity. We've covered a lot of ground here: social and economic impacts, threats to India's unique biodiversity. But this is a global challenge. India can't solve this alone. What role does international cooperation play in tackling rising sea levels? We'll explore that and dive into some potential solutions in the final part of our deep dive. So make sure you stick around, and don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to stay informed. So we've talked about the impacts, those social, economic, and environmental challenges facing India. But this isn't just India's problem, right? It's a global crisis that needs a global response.
Absolutely. Rising sea levels, it's the perfect example of a transboundary issue. What happens in one part of the world, it affects everyone else. So yeah, international cooperation is absolutely essential.
Okay, so what does that cooperation look like in practice? How do countries actually work together on this?
Well, international agreements, those are key.
Hmm.
Think the Paris Agreement, aiming to limit that global warming, and by doing that, mitigating that sea level rise. It's a framework, for countries to set those emission reduction targets, share technology and resources, help developing nations adapt.
Right, a roadmap for tackling climate change, the root of the problem. But we've got to be realistic. Progress on those agreements, it's been slow. There's often those conflicting interests, political roadblocks, so we can't rely on that alone. What about technology? Can that offer solutions, for dealing with rising sea levels?
Oh, technology definitely has a huge role to play. We're seeing a lot of cool advancements in coastal engineering, like innovative seawalls, flood barriers, things that can actually protect those vulnerable coastlines. And then there's all the research into nature-based solutions, restoring those coastal ecosystems, mangroves, oyster reefs. They can act as natural buffers against those storm surges and erosion.
So combining human ingenuity with the power of nature. And what about advancements in, climate modeling and those early warning systems? Can tech help us predict and prepare for the impacts?
Absolutely. Improved climate models, powered by those supercomputers and tons of data, they can give us much more accurate projections of future sea level rise. And that means we can anticipate those potential impacts and plan accordingly. And those advanced early warning systems, Using real-time data from satellites and ocean buoys, those sophisticated algorithms, they can give coastal communities more time to prepare, evacuate, potentially save lives, reduce damage.
So leveraging technology to boost our resilience and our response capabilities. Okay, as we wrap up this deep dive, let's bring it back to those UPSC aspirants out there. We've explored the science, the impacts, the potential solutions. But the big question remains, what does a future with rising sea levels mean for India? What should they be thinking about as they prep for their exams and for their future roles in shaping policy?
That's the question, isn't it? And it demands critical thinking, creativity, a deep understanding of all these interconnected challenges we've been talking about. As aspiring policymakers, they need to think about how India can balance that economic development with environmental sustainability, how to implement those adaptation strategies, leverage technology and international cooperation to reduce those risks.
Recognizing that this isn't just an environmental issue, it's social, economic, geopolitical. It's going to shape India's future in huge ways. And those UPSC aspirants, they have the potential to be at the forefront, tackling this complex issue, coming up with innovative solutions, leading India towards a more sustainable, resilient future. And that brings us to the end of our deep dive into rising sea levels. We hope you got a lot out of it, from the science to the policy implications, and that it'll serve you well in your UPSC journey. Don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to our channel for more deep dives, and leave us a comment below if you have any questions or thoughts. Until next time, this is The Deep Dive, helping you stay ahead of the curve.